Hi, I'm Andrew Arch, Principal Consultant with Intopia, where I've been working for the last few years. I've been working with digital accessibility for about 2 decades in a variety of government and not-for-profit organisations. If you want to follow me, you can tweet me on @AMJA, that's @AMJA. Sarah.
Thanks so much, Andrew. I'm Sarah Pulis. I'm director and co-founder of Intopia. I can only claim about 1 decade, so half the time that Andrew's been working in accessibility. And we were actually just reflecting that we would have met at OZeWAI probably about 20 odd years ago, around 2002.
Yes, I think that was my first OZeWAI. It was either 2002, 2003, but I think it was 2002.
Either way, it was a while ago.
Yes.
You can also catch me on Twitter, Sarah with an H, Sarah TP.
Okay, so Sarah and I today are going to talk about designing for people with cognitive impairments. And historically, design is concentrated on sensory and physical disabilities, with the cognitive needs often being overlooked. Partly this is because cognitive disabilities what we might call hidden or invisible, compared with more visible disabilities where people might have a guide dog, a service dog, use a white cane, be in a wheelchair and things like that.
This sort of lack was also recognised by the W3C Web Accessibility Initiative, who published the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG. They recognised that certainly in WCAG 2.0, there wasn't a lot of guidance that really talked to the needs of cognitive and learning disabilities, or people with cognitive and learning disabilities. As a result, WAI formed the Cognitive and Learning Disability Accessibility Task Force. And this task force helped address and have a look at really research around this space. And those research outputs have fed into updates to WCAG 2.1, the soon to be released 2.2, which is due June next year, and also WCAG 3.0, which is being worked on as well. In addition to this, though, they've also published a really great draft document called Making Content Usable for People with Cognitive and Learning Disabilities. And it's really this document that has inspired today's talk and what we're going to share with you.
But it's actually been quite interesting this year, Sarah, because we've seen some increased focus on designing for the variation in cognition as a result of things like mental health, particularly as a result of the COVID situation, and more attention is being paid more broadly to this area. So it's really good that the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines are also incorporating the needs for people with cognitive and learning disabilities. So understanding user needs, we must consider the differences in people's perception of what they see and hear. Differences in their long and short-term memory, and those of you with older members of the family may notice that as some of those older members move into older age, 80s and 90s, that memory can decline somewhat. People's attention span and the ability to concentrate. Differences in learning styles and abilities. I know I learn better when I'm reading something than when I'm watching the video about it. The differences in visual, spatial, verbal, numerical thinking and understanding, and to how people just perceive different types of the ways information is presented. So these could be permanent, they could be environmental, they could be situational, and as I mentioned, they could well be age-related as well, or they could be a result of a medical condition such as mental health, medication, or even a physical illness with pain that affects your ability to concentrate and take in information. So the design, the structure, the language choices can make content inaccessible to people with content and cognitive and learning disabilities. And it's important that we frame our design choices in terms of meeting user needs rather than addressing diagnosed conditions, because the user need is common across many different conditions that we might consider.
As with anything related to diversity and inclusion, it's also important that we recognise that individuals have different traits. And those traits shouldn't necessarily be classified as good or bad. They really just are. When we talk about cognitive differences, we need to recognize these different traits, and some people actually call them their superpowers. So in the past, disability was often framed in terms of the medical model of disability, where it was more something was wrong with the person, it was something that it was a health condition they were diagnosed with. Of course, today that social model of disability aligns so well with those user needs, and also that we are designing for those user needs so that someone isn't disabled by their surroundings, their environment, the way that we build things. And when we talk about cognitive impairments, this has been reflected in the shift in terminology in some communities to neurodiversity. And that recognition that neurodiversity is that people are just diverse, and that those traits, whether, just sort of play out in different ways. Now, neurodiversity can include, but is not necessarily limited to, people who may experience dyslexia, dyscalculia, dyspraxia, say those 3 times fast, ADHD, people who are on the autism spectrum or who have developmental language disorder. This particular diagram that we have on the screen actually takes some particular traits that were highlighted by an article, and the source, you can reference that source in the slides, but they talk about these different traits that includes persistence, being imaginative, anxious, creative, being a problem solver, ruminating on things, or having memory challenges. And all of these are different user needs, and we want to design for those user needs when thinking about cognitive and neurodiversity. So the COCA document that we mentioned before has some incredible information in there. Today, we're actually going to pull out some key points that we wanted to share. It is going to be quite a rapid fire, broad sort of brush about some of those things we wanted to highlight that will help you design experiences that do look at those different user needs. But we really encourage you to actually go and have a look at that document. It's got some user stories in there, some use cases and personas, and then some design guides that actually align with those different user stories and those different user needs. So there's certainly lots and lots of information in there that is going to be really beneficial to you moving forward.
So using clear and understandable language. People with learning and language needs may need simple, clear language, simple, clear instructions. We all really need that, but some people need it more than I find I need it. People with different reading skills will appreciate shorter text and well-structured text. People with social or communication difficulties may need clear literal language and not understand metaphors or non-literal text and symbols. So it's really important that we take these different learning and reading skills into account, and the understandability of what it is that we're presenting. So the first of these design considerations is provide clear headings, and that's been in WCAG for a while now, clear headings to differentiate the different material, but it's particularly important for people who might have difficulty negotiating their way through large blocks of text, so that each section of content has a heading that clearly describes what they can expect, or what we can expect when we're reading the following content. The good use of white space is important to separate out the different parts of the page, and proximity, so that the heading is more visually associated with the following paragraph. And occasionally we see where the spacing hasn't been done quite right, and that paragraph heading, the section heading can sit closer to the preceding paragraph, and that just causes that cognitive dissonance that makes you think something's not quite right, and you've got to sort of think twice about how you're reading that page, because that proximity and the white space can just assist in the visual organisation of a page. And, as I mentioned before, no marketing speak, no super technical terms that the audience wouldn't be expecting. Of course, technical terms are good for the appropriate audience, but keeping them out of something that you're writing for a general population is really important, and not using idioms and metaphors and things like that not everybody might understand.
What I find interesting about some of these design considerations, and in particular, number one around clear headings, and our next one talking about plain languages, a lot of these are actually picked up in some of the AAA requirements of WCAG already. So that concept of section headings actually is a AAA requirement, making sure each distinct section of content has a heading. And our second one around plain language aligns with our AAA requirement around reading level. So when we use plain language, using clear words, simple tense, avoiding those metaphors and idioms, as Andrew mentioned, will all go towards, having quite plain language that is really easy for everyone to understand. Also use literal text. So, avoid phrases like, if you're experiencing cold feet, which is sort of more metaphorical. Instead, use, if you're experiencing anxiety before starting, that is not relying on a metaphor to understand what information we're trying to convey there.
Sarah mentioned there that some of these things are already in WCAG, but they're at the AAA level, and that really just makes it important. Most people are trying to achieve a level AA if they're taking WCAG as their guidance, but there's quite a few things at AAA that really do make the difference for a wide group of people, and the clear headings and the plain language are two of those. The other thing that can help is providing a summary of long documents. The TLDR, to use an acronym, if it's too long and you don't want to read it, read the summary, and providing an easy read summary using common terms, short blocks of text, and a much plain language can help people understand and decide whether they really want to wade through your maybe more technical material.
And our last piece of advice is around providing alternatives for numbers. So not all people can understand numbers or numerical concepts. So let's say, for example, instead of using a scale of 1 to 5 to signify, how hot or cold it is, use terms instead, very cold, cold, mild, hot, or very hot. This reinforcement of numbers alongside non-numerical concepts can really help with that understandability. So our next section we wanted to talk about was helping users avoid mistakes or easily correct them. So interestingly, this is just even good UX practice. One of the Nielsen-Norman heuristics actually is around preventing people from making mistakes. But with an accessibility lens, it can be particularly important for people who have difficulty with organisation, such as executive function, typing, putting letters and numbers in the right order. All these different user needs or people with these different user needs, I should say, will benefit from having an interface that helps them avoid making mistakes or correcting them. It's just, as I said, it's just part of good UX practice. So one of our first things, just providing clear instructions. Clear instructions help prevent users from making mistakes. And it's interesting how many times we still find websites that are really missing the mark on this, on really simple things like not letting someone know what password requirements are, like, you need to have a letter, a number, a capital letter, that kind of thing. Not actually letting someone know before they start putting in a password, actually only letting them know once they make the mistake and embedding that information within the error state. We're still seeing time and again where that isn't even, it isn't actually happening even now. Another thing is designing for tolerance. So, not forcing the user to enter in information in a particular format, but actually designing designing robust interfaces that can take those different formats. So if we've got a phone number or a credit card, allowing someone to enter it in with spaces, without spaces, and then just stripping out that information and not making them do the hard work. So in that case, we're not even having to provide instructions. We're actually designing for different ways that people might actually input information. The last thing around providing instructions could be letting the user know how long it might take to complete a task. Now, when we do that, we need to acknowledge that, different people are going to take different lengths of time. So instead of saying, oh, this will take 10 minutes, maybe talk about how many steps there are in a process, so that a user knows, hey, look, this is going to be a quick short form versus actually this is a lot longer application. I've got 8 steps to do, so I know that it's going to take me a little while longer.
The second design consideration is providing clear and visible labels, and again, this is really just good usability, so that that label provides a clear indication of what somebody is expected to put into a form, and will help prevent them from making mistakes. And the call out is that these labels need to be visible at all the times. Don't remove the label when a user starts to enter data, and we see things like placeholder text used as labels too often. And if somebody walks away, or they've got that short-term memory impairment, and they've started typing their name, and then they have to think, is that just my first name? Is it my full name? What are we actually expected to type in here? And the only way to find out is to actually remove that and go back to a previous part of the form and come forward again. So that's extra cognitive load that you're putting on people to complete that form. The related to that, is allowing users to save, continue, and review. Allow people to go back and check what they might have put in on a previous page, and certainly at the end of the process to review everything that they might be submitting to you. But partway through, if it is a 8-step, as Sarah mentioned, maybe an 8-step process to complete something, giving them the option partway through to save and continue, because that cognitive load might just get them to the point where, okay, I can't continue now. So saving, coming back later, continuing, is just something that's going to help everybody.
And our last piece of advice here is providing feedback to the user on either success or failure. So making those results and results of each action clear for people with a variety of cognitive disabilities. So that can be as you go through step by step, providing that feedback, but that this step is complete, we've now moved on to the next step. But then, of course, also at the end of the process as well. So to say, yep, this has been successful, or actually there are errors here, or maybe, hey, we've got to process your application. So, what do you expect to happen next?
Yep. So the next area we want to look at is allowing users to focus and concentrate. And I think we've touched on a couple of those things, but people with dementia often find concentration difficult. People on the autism spectrum can find concentration difficult. People who have difficulty concentrating could be distracted by lots of content that might not be related to what it is that they're trying to do. Think of animations on a page. So excessive or unnecessary movement. And information on a page that's not related to what they're doing, that might, a heading might draw their attention. So then they've got to try and come back to where they were to keep up and continue with where they were. So the first of these limiting distractions is limiting the amount of motion and movement on the page, not having autoplay so that they don't have audio or video running in front of them while they're trying to do something or trying to read some information. So typical things are news pages where you scroll down the page and the video just starts playing as it comes into view, and that can be so distracting that it's hard for some people to keep reading and move on further down the page until that video is completed.
Our next tip is the optimization of content. So really just providing content that is important or relevant for the task that someone is performing. We both work with lots of organizations, and we know this sometimes jars against maybe we want to put things in front of people to make them buy extra things or that, but really we need to keep that content lean and keep it focused on that particular task. Make sure that people know, or the content that people needs to know is that it's important to stand out. So don't let it get lost in lots of other unrelated content. Also, it's usually good practice to have a maximum of 5 or less main choices on a screen. So we can hide extra choices under sort of progressive disclosure. So someone can expand on a menu or an accordion or that to provide to sort of find extra information. But for those main tasks, those key flows that a user might want to do on a page, make sure they're really prominent, really clear, and not lost with lots and lots of other information and links out to say other pages.
A third tip here is streamlining the process and the workflows, and part of that in terms of reducing the cognitive load is only asking to collect the information from the user that they need, that you need for them to complete a process. You get asked for your date of birth on various websites, and you think, why on earth do I want to give away that private bit of information? And maybe it's important to know that you are over 18 if you're filling in an order form on a liquor store site, but to know how old you are for most other uses is totally irrelevant. And keeping the information that you're asking the user to reveal to the minimum that you need for them to complete a process is pretty important. Go on,
And the
Sarah.
last part around instructions. So we talked about providing instructions, to reduce errors, but in this case, we're actually also talking about providing instructions at the right time. So if someone needs to, for instance, have driver's license, passport number, that kind of thing, let a user know they need that information before they start the process. They can then collect that information, have it ready, and start the process whenever they want. They don't have to do that all at once. They don't have to be quickly running off to find that driver's license, find that passport, before, say, a form might, time out. The second part is then, as a user progresses through, say, a form or a task, letting them know that the right information at the right point in time. So, don't necessarily put all those instructions at the front, have them in line, have them close to the form field or the task that you're performing. So you don't have to rely on memory in order to complete that form or complete that task. So our next guideline or recommendation looks on the reliance on memory, and in particular, reducing reliance on memory. So people who have difficulty with short-term memory may experience difficulty in recalling information. So they might have difficulty remembering where they are on your site, what they've done in previous steps of a process. So if you're going through different steps to do a task, remembering, at what point they've got through, what they've come from, or, example of, how many times have you been on the phone with one of those voice menus where, press 1 to this, press 2 to that, press 3 to this, and you're madly trying to remember which one it is that you want. All of these rely on someone's short-term memory, and we want to reduce that reliance as much as possible. Other things that might have difficulty with memory, longer-term memory, remembering passwords is a great example of this that, relies on that longer-term memory. And if you don't remember it, then, it might be difficult for you to, say, log in if you have forgot your password. You might go through that process of resetting it and then, do that again when you come to the website in sort of 5, 10, 20 days' time. So our first tip around this is using different authentication methods. So Make your login processes as simple as possible. Definitely do not have a multi-step login process. Have a login process that doesn't require, puzzles or calculations. Interestingly, an organization, a fairly prominent organization, recently addressed a security concern by putting a captcha every single time you had to log in.
Well, I had one of those too recently, and it was every time I changed pages, it wanted to know what I was up to.
Yeah, that's right. Definitely find a way around that. If there are security concerns, a capture in that particular situation is absolutely going to be difficult and or even impossible for some people to work around.
So, we want to obviously avoid captures in this case, at least the type of captures where you are presented with puzzles, because they are going to stop people who have trouble understanding what the puzzle is about and what you're expected to do. I mean, I know I'm miss things, even the capture that gets presented and you're asked to identify every picture that's got a bus in it. Some of those are just really hard. Other things where somebody is asked a simple or arithmetic question, 2 + 2 equals, and they're expected to know that it equals 4. But for people who might have dyscalculia or not be able to understand numbers so well, then that's going to provide a real barrier to them.
Our next one is around making navigation explicit. So having clear and understandable menu items, clear link text, yay for AAA link purpose on its own, to quote another WCAG criteria that I think is near and dear to many of our hearts, and also looking at navigation mechanisms like breadcrumbs. Breadcrumbs are great for showing related or higher level pages to remind people where they might have come from. You don't necessarily have to. You might have found the page through a search engine, but it's certainly, if you're progressing through the page and you've navigated down a number of different menu options, that breadcrumb really reminds you, where you've come from. You could also use a breadcrumb structure for as you're going through a process like filling in a form as well, to say, step 1, yep. Step 2, step 3.
Yep. And our final tip here is, provide some different ways to get help. So people have different methods that they prefer. So there are ideas like providing a chat window, whether it be initially a bot or human that might be behind there, providing help, obviously. Helps some people, providing a contact number that they can actually call during business hours. So there's a real risk actually in removing the human channels that people might want to do. And this is one of the things that they're actually looking at addressing in WCAG 2.2 is how people can get in touch if things aren't working for them. Don't make the user think unnecessarily. Isn't this obvious? How many books have been written on this? The topic of don't make everybody think too much. Just make it obvious what they're expected to do. So people with difficulties processing information, can take a lot longer than I might take to find the features and content if they're not designed to be clear, visible, obvious. So this comes back to some of the things we talked about earlier, like really clear navigation, really clear section headings for parts of the text, clear labels on our forms. Significant changes, if you make significant changes to your design, it may be almost impossible for some users to learn that brand new interface. So those redesigns that happen, every 3 to 5 years on a lot of websites just throw some users completely. And I know, my mother-in-law, when she uses Facebook, and when Facebook does a redesign of things, she calls the family and says, "I can't do it." Even though she's been doing it for months or a year, just because they've changed that, because her learning abilities have slowed down with her older age. So, it's much better to make, small incremental changes that will reduce that cognitive load and that learnability, rather than maybe doing a whole site refresh and a whole site, re-IA and re-architecturing the where all the stuff is, and doing a rebrand. This also relates back, as I said, to that clear content, to make sure that, if you are doing this, make sure that all your labels and your headings and everything are as clear as you can possibly make them. And the obvious one there, as our first tip, is to use consistent patterns, so that, as somebody moves across your site, it is, presenting consistent interface, and, they experience common controls that do what they say it, it is. And, we do see inconsistencies. We sometimes see squares used for radio buttons and vice versa. But people have been on all the other sites, and they know that, if they've been across the web for quite a bit now, with a radio button, you can only select one. A checkbox with a square outline, you can select multiples if you want to. And so changing those things around just, puts that extra cognitive load. What on earth's going on?
Our next tip is around proximity. So we touched on this before around headings, but just generally speaking, using proximity and space to group related information and to separate other information that might be unrelated. This can really just help people to focus on content, and to know that this content is related, so I should concentrate on it as a block and then move to another block of content. Doesn't just help with cognitive impairment. We often talk about proximity in relation to low vision, so someone who might have a limited field of vision using a screen magnifier. That proximity, when that person can't see the entire screen, is also going to help see that information, see related information, not have to go hunt for it.
Our third tip is the addition of symbols and pictures as well as text. So, I mean, we often see that with the icons for social media, where it might say Facebook and then it's got the Facebook icon. It might say Twitter and it's got the little bird for that familiarity. So making it easier for people to recognize bits of information. We're talking sort of the easy English that we might be doing, but it's not down at that level of really simple explanations. But using a series of pictures and icons to help people understand what it is that they're going to be reading about. But counter to that, don't rely on these symbols and icons on their own. And we often see the use of the hamburger menu as the screen shrinks. The menu that we see across the top of the screen goes into 3 lines. Where's the menu? If you're not familiar with that concept, if you've just got the 3 lines, that can confuse some people. Using 3 lines with the word menu gives the idea that, yes, we've got something that if you're familiar with it, you'll recognize those 3 lines as a menu option at a glance. If you're not familiar, you've got the word menu next to it. So this is about, different ways of learning, different ways of remembering how to do things.
And our last one is providing search. Some people just find it easier to use a search function to find information on your website. Make sure, though, that search gives relevant results and also uses terms that are sort of what users would commonly use. So someone might be on a website and need information about death, probably use the word death rather than passed away.
So as we mentioned earlier, WCAG 2.2 is taking into account some of the work from the COCA task force. 3 new criteria that we're expecting to appear. They're in the draft for WCAG 2.2 at the moment. The first one of these is about accessible authentication. Sarah, I'll let you talk. I'm stumbling over my words.
No worries. So we'd already touched on that in one of the tips, but this requirement is specifically going to look at making sure that there is at least one authentication method that doesn't require a user to either remember information and either manipulate or transcribe information as well. So that's currently in draft. So we'll see where that one goes.
Second one is about findable help, and we've talked about the help being important, but findable help, if a website owner, they're expecting a website owner to provide a variety of support channels for those visitors, and that they should support, advertise what channels are available. And they should use the same name to describe those contact points or support points, and put them in the same location right across the site. And that's coming back to that consistent experience of where things are. And at the moment, it looks as though the findable help criteria is going to say that you need to include at least one of the following support channels: human contact details, which might be phone, email, and what hours they might be available or being responded to. A human contact mechanism, be it a messaging system, a chat client where there's a human behind it rather than a bot, maybe a contact form, or maybe social media where somebody might respond fairly quickly. So a self-help option such as FAQs or how do I do something, and a fully automated contact mechanism, i.e. a chatbot with some AI behind it.
The third criteria that we feel strongly relates to cognitive is redundant entry. So in essence, it's making sure if someone's already put in information and say as part of a step within a process, don't make them put it in again. Either pre-fill the information and allow them to edit it if need be, or make it available for reuse. So an easy way to just say, yep, use that same information. Great example of this is billing versus delivery address. You fill in your billing address, it then asks, would you like to use the same address for your delivery address so that you don't have to enter it in again?
So what we've talked about, and some of that material is going to be incorporated into WCAG is great. The COCA task force have got documentation, and there's other things around on the web. And we'll share a URL where you can find our slides with some extra resources shortly. But there's really no substitute for talking with users and undertaking that user research early on, during the process, during your design process, during your writing and content development process, and then making sure that what you actually present to them at the end of the day, that they can understand. If you're working in government, you're probably familiar with the Digital Service Standard, and the first criteria in that Digital Service Standard is understand user needs. And it states something along the lines of your user research needs have to cover a wide range of users and show that you understand how different user scenarios may impact the service design and delivery of your digital product. So making sure that you do all that testing right from the start, from that design, and even before you start to understand what the user needs are that you're going to be designing for is crucial. You might, not all users are going to be able to use the online service though, and recognize that you do need other channels. It might be the walk-in shop front, it might be telephony, and some of the other, support help that we talked about that might be coming into WCAG 2.2.
And as mentioned, we do have some resources at the end of these slides. So we've uploaded the slides to SlideShare. They can be accessed by visiting the following link, bit.ly, bit.ly/Intopia, INTOPIA -OZeWAI, OZeWAI -2020.
Thanks for listening to us. We'll be available for some discussion. I hope we've left enough time for that. So let's have some questions and answers.
Absolutely. And you can contact Andrew and I, Andrew at intopia.digital or Amja for Twitter, and Sarah at intopia.digital and Sarah TP on Twitter. Thank you all. We'll talk to you soon.